Good morning, good morning, good morning. My new cameras don't work. The old camera works.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Not ideal, but it works, right? You hear?
Yes.
All right. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Yud Dalid. We are starting the third and the final chapter of Moed Katan, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, by the Mishnah. Now, first of all, as we mentioned, Perek Shlishi of Moed Katan, Ve'elu Megalchen, is the source of all of the halachas of Avelis. Interestingly, as we're going to go through the sugya of Avelus, we will notice that there are two practices of Avelus that are not done nowadays. One is called Atifas Haroish. There was a unique way that people would wrap their head and have the garment that they used to wrap their head go over the forehead, over their nose, all the way down to their lips. That's a practice, as we'll speak out, that's not done nowadays. We will also be learning about another practice known as Kefias Hamita, which is the overturning of the bed. And according to many, they used to overturn all of the beds in the home if the home belonged to someone who was in a mourning period. And again, this is another practice that's not done nowadays, and we will explain why. Now, the Perek will not begin with the laws of mourning. The Perek is going to begin, and we're going to continue to speak about the laws of Chol HaMoed. And we'll see soon how we'll link it into Hilchas Avelus. But up until now, we learned a very important rule, which is that if there is an activity that is needed for the festival, for Yom Tov, L'tzoyrech HaMoed, whether it's only for Chol HaMoed, whether it's for the last days, whether it's for both, the rule is that will be permitted. At best, in worst case scenario, like we learned, you cannot do it befaresia. If you're doing something that's l'tzoyrech hamoed, but you can't readily discern that it is for the festival needs, you got to figure out how to resolve that. But the rule is anything that's done for Yom Tov is allowed to be done on Chol HaMoed. And really, we will see that there are two big exceptions to that rule. What are the two exceptions? Number one, taking a haircut. If a person wants to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed because they would like to have their hair cut for Yom Tov, or Chol HaMoed for the last days, they may not do so. And similarly, laundering clothing is also something, even though one is doing it for Yom Tov, it may not be done. That's step number one. Step number two, actually the Mishnah begins with step number two, is that we have exceptions to these exceptions. Even though taking a haircut and laundering the clothing may not be done, even though it's l'tzoyrech hamoed, there are certain scenarios where one is allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. There are certain scenarios where one is allowed to launder the clothing on Chol HaMoed, and we're going to be learning about that. Now, when we're speaking about hair cutting, we're going to go into an oval that someone who is in a mourning period, such a person may not cut their hair. We'll see that an avel may not cut their hair, including for those people who cut their beards in a halachically permissible way, according to some. They also may not do so for the entirety of 30 days. As we'll get into more details, we're going to learn that there aren't any obligations of mourning on a minor. Ein avelus b'katan. And Daf Yudalad Amud Beis, we're going to begin to touch the topic of avelus and Yom Tov. Here we're going to learn the rule that avel einoi noiheg avelusay beregel, that an avel does not keep any of the laws of mourning during Yom Tov, not even those laws of mourning that one will keep on Shabbos. And that will be the beginning of a topic that we will actually follow through on Daf Chav Gimel. And we actually paskin like the more lenient opinion on Daf Chav Gimel, that not only does one not practice the laws of mourning on Yom Tov, but the Yom Tov actually cuts the days of mourning. So as we'll learn that the Shiva is 7 days, if Yom Tov falls within the Shiva, it ends the Shiva early, as we'll learn this sugya as we unpackage it. Now, as we'll see how far we can get on Daf Yudalit, but we will see that the laws of mourning and the laws of someone who was excommunicated by a Beis Din, someone that was put into a nidui, as we'll speak about, and someone who was a Mitzayra, have a lot of similarities. And these similarities, or perhaps exceptions where they are not similar, is going to be basically the topic, Yudalad Amud Beis, and the entire Daf Tezvav, speaking about every single law of a mourner, and to see whether that law of mourning also applies to someone who's in a van, whether it also applies to someone who is a Mitzayra. And finally, even though we're not beginning with mourning, we're beginning with Chol HaMoed, just for the clarity again, someone is in mourning halachically, someone is obligated to mourn halachically if someone lost one of the following 7 close relatives, God forbid, either a father or a mother, brother, sister, son or daughter, spouse. These are the 7 people for whom we must mourn. Mourning itself goes through various stages. There is the day of the passing prior to burial. Then that person, the relative who's alive, is called a oinen. He's in a very severe phase of mourning. And there are unique laws for the person who is a oinen, or hilchos aninus. Then you have the burial, which ends the aninus. And now you begin what we call the shiva. And then when the Shiva concludes, you have what we call the Shloishim, which is counted from the burial and not from the day of the passing. And if a person is mourning for father or mother, then the laws of mourning to a certain degree go for the entire 12 months, but to a lesser degree than to the Shloishim. Let's leave it at that. There's many arguments whether Avelus is Midoiraisa, whether Avelus is Midrabanan, and people that are thinking say, you're kidding? The Torah writes twice about Avelus. One beremes, one clearly, right? But when by Parshas Noach, I forgot the exact words. Vayihi, when the Torah speaks about that the Mabul was going to fall in 7 days, so Rashi writes that there was a certain delay of 7 days because people were sitting shiva for the passing of Nisu Shelach. That Tzaddik Rashi writes. So we did sit shiva prior to the Torah being given. The Torah also writes regarding Yaakov Avinu. After all of the mourning that they did in Mitzrayim, right? They embalmed him and then they mourned him. After that, when his children, our grandparents, took Yaakov Avinu to the Holy Land, so at one point the Torah writes befedish that there was an Avel Shivas Yamim. The Torah speaks about 7 days of Avelus, but this is the rule, my friends. Remember the rule that Ein Lemedim Mikoidim Matan Torah, Nitna Torah v'Neschat Halacha. The fact that we do a bris milah right now is not because Avraham Avinu did a bris milah. It's because God commanded us in Sinai to make a bris milah on the 8th day. And we know that this began with Avraham Avinu. So there is a link to Avraham Avinu. But just because things were practiced prior to Matan Torah, the rule is that is not the source nor a reason for a Jewish person to fulfill them today. And therefore, there are many opinions that hold that Avelus is only Midrabanan. But we're going to get to that whole topic as we begin learning the Sugya.
Science. Besides, doesn't it talk about Avelus in V'zesh HaBracha also?
Where do we have Avelus?
V'zesh HaBracha when Moshe Rabbeinu.
Correct. We cried for him. Crying for him doesn't necessarily, the Torah does not use the word Avelus. We have Tikis about Koida. What's the word? What's the pasuk? I think Vayifku Olav. There's, I think, if I'm not, it's about crying and not about more. It's a big
something like that, right?
Okay, let's start on Daf Yud Gimel Lamed Beis. Let's begin with the Mishnah. Again, this is amazing. It's amazing that we learn two parakim, one of the biggest hatatim. It's not even called a hetet. That's something on Chol HaMoed that you are doing for Yom Tiv, whether it's just for Chol HaMoed or only for the last days or for both, is allowed to be done. Maybe again, not befaresia sometimes. Spices, yeah, fruits not. But hair cutting, laundering as a rule may not be done on Chol HaMoed. Now, why? We'll see in the Gemara. So that's the exception. The Mishnah begins with the exception for the exception. There are times that it will be permitted. The following people are allowed to cut their hair on Chol HaMoed. And these are all people that had no such opportunity prior to Yom Tov. For example, someone who came from overseas. We're going to learn details for everyone in the Gemara. But let's go with the presumption that the trip that you made was an obligatory trip. So who asked you to travel? The person had to travel, and they were unable. There was no barber on the ship. They arrived either on Chol HaMoed or they arrived at Yom Tov right before Yom Tov. Number two, if a person was freed from jail, I'm sorry, someone who was not in jail, someone who was taken captive, someone who was kidnapped, who was freed, or someone who left jail. Now, hold on. In jail, aren't there barbers in jail? This is very important. So let's read the last Tosfos in the Amud. So Tosfos says either that we're speaking about someone who was in a base or asurim in a jail in which there was no barbers or the inmates were not allowed to cut their hair, or now this is a very big Tosfos. That since a person in jail is not in the mood of cutting their hair, it's considered that they were unable to take a haircut prior to Yom Tov. That's a very big line, and that can be used for various atatim. In other words, not that you physically couldn't have, you were not in the mental space to take a haircut, and you were freed. Now it's Yom Tov. Now you didn't have such an opportunity prior, and now back in the Mishnah, the Hamenuda, someone who was put into a ban. Now, guys, the sugya of someone who was put into a ban by a Beis Din will really begin on Daf Tez Zayin. It's going to be a fascinating Gemara. There are different violations for which Beis Din at times will put someone in a ban. For example, someone was found guilty on a financial level. So Beis Din says, Reuven, pay Shimon, and he doesn't do so. So one of the tools that Beis Din has to use to force, so to say, Reuven is to tell him there's a whole system that if you won't make payment up until a certain date, you're going to be put in a ban. Now, obviously, if Reuven tells the Beis Din, I want to pay, ainly, which was such a good claim, I don't have, he won't be banned that quick. And then Beis Din will have to ascertain whether it's true or not. But if a person has the money and they don't listen to Beis Din, there are times that they ban him. Now, there are other reasons to ban a person. There's a people that are very disrespectful. The words, to Talmidei Chachamim, they are also put into a ban. These are not exactly the same. One is more serious, one is less serious. It depends for what. But let's speak about generally that if someone was put into a ban, as we'll see, also like a mitzvah, avelus, we'll see. Menuda, mitzvah, share, generally the same rules. They may not take a haircut. If this person was freed, was released from the ban, from the excommunication that Beis Din put on him during Chol HaMoed, while he was menuda, he was not allowed to take a haircut. He was only released from his ban on Chol HaMoed. Or a person made a vow. I vow that he's not going to take a haircut, and he released himself from this vow on Chol HaMoed, v'hutar. Or a person who's a nazir who may not take a haircut, and the days of his nazirus concluded. Again, either Erev Yom Tov, like right to Erev, in this case, it concluded during Chol HaMoed, or V'hametzoida mitumasi l'tarasoi, what's the bach? V'hametzoida ha'oila mitumasi l'tarasoi. So we know from the Kitzur that when the Metzoida is already undergoing his procedure to become pure, he counts 7 days, and on the 7th day, he again has to shave his hair. What happens if the seventh day falls out on Chol HaMoed? So it's Erev Yom Tov was within those 7 days in which he may not cut his hair. So since they were unable to do so prior to Yom Tov, we allow them, yes, to take a haircut during Chol HaMoed. Regarding laundering, the same concept. The following people are allowed to launder their clothing on Chol HaMoed. All the cases, a person who came from overseas, or a person was a captive somewhere and he was released, or he left jail, $1 on the top, or a menuda, as we'll see that a menuda also may not launder his clothing, or right prior to Yom Tov. A person made a vow not to launder clothing, and during Chol HaMoed he released himself from that vow. And now we're going to learn about certain garments that even though you had the opportunity and you clean them before Yom Tov, they are used so often that they constantly need to be cleaned. For example, mitpuchais hayadayim, hand towels. Now we have napkins. They have no napkins. So they cleaned all the hand towels. Comes Yom Tov, everyone used the hand towels. So it's not that we didn't clean them before. We laundered them before. They are all soiled again. They are allowed to be cleaned on Chol HaMoed. Or mitpuchais hasaparim. Now there's two ways of touching it. We're going to go with saparim as a barber. Until today, you sit by a barber. They put a certain shawl. They put a certain garment around you to protect your clothing from the hair. Now, so those garments, since the Mishnah already gave exceptions for which you are allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. So if a barber is giving 2 or 3 people haircuts on Chol HaMoed, beheaded. And after they gave a haircut to Reuven, now that, whatever you call that today, I think it's plastic, it feels like, but whatever they would put would be a garment. Now it's dirty with hair from Reuven. What, Shimon has to have Reuven's hair on him? No, he doesn't. That's something that you cleaned it before, but now it got dirty again. You can clean it again. Or mitpuchais hasapag. Mitpuchais hasapag means that in the bathhouse, same thing also. So you have the towels. Think about our home. You cleaned all the towels before. They are all used. Now they have to be cleaned again. It's anything that you did everything you could do, but it got nachamal. It needs to be laundered. Or v'hazavim, v'hazavis, v'hanidus, v'hayoldis. These are people that have something physically flowing out of their body, and therefore their garments continuously need to be cleaned. Or there are certain people that have a status of tumah to the point that they make the garments that they are wearing also tummy, like a person who's tamei mace on a level of an av and others. So when they become tahor, we're not speaking about laundering to clean it from a physical impurity, but only now they want to also, when people then would go to the mikveh, imagine they would also put their garments in the mikveh because they want their garments to be tahor. Well, that's also laundering. You are allowed to do it because they only became tahor during Chol HaMoed. Hadei elu mutarim, to launder or to toivel their clothing. However, the shar kol adam, both regarding hair cutting and regarding laundering, even though it's l'tzayda chamoyed, asurim, they are not allowed to cut their hair or to launder their garments during Chol HaMoed. That is the opening of Perek Shlishi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shar kol nivdvarim. And now comes the question: why l'tzayda chamoyed? Fragt die Gemara v'shar kol adam my tam asurim. Now, let's not forget that we did learn a concept at the end of the last chapter that one is not allowed to be machaven. One is not allowed to say that even though I have an opportunity to do a certain work, don't delay it for Chol HaMoed. So we already know that concept. Enoch, we learned that there's a penalty. Remember that? Only for the father, not for the children. Here it's much more serious. Says the Gemara Katan. And we are going to make a correlation, and we're going to have this very often to Tainus. It's interesting regarding other dinim, not related, but we're going back to Masechta Tainus. And we learned over there that both the Kohanim and the Leviim that are serving in their Mishmar week, and the Yisraelim that were designated to stand, Va'anshei Maimad, they were engaged in their service for that week. So the Mishnah writes in Tainus that they during that week are not allowed to l'sapir, nor l'chabes. They can't take a haircut, nor can they launder the clothing, but l'chavet Shabbos they could. And b'chal, since people generally Friday were busy buying food and cooking food and baking food, So people who would get ready for Shabbos would really begin on Thursday. So b'chamishi mutanim epnei kavod Shabbos. But the whole different side sugya regarding taking a haircut on Thursday, whether you could take a haircut, whether you cannot take a haircut, it's interesting. Nails we don't cut on Thursday because nails on the hair when you cut them, their regrowth becomes apparent on the third day from when you cut them. If you cut your nails on Thursday, you can see them coming back on Shabbos. You don't want to do something that gives the appearance that it's starting on Shabbos. So nails, taka, we don't cut, and here we cut. How can you cut your hair? Because the Kohen Gadol was no melech, was mistaper b'chol yoim. And that's the bottom line is they took a haircut on Thursday. And
Rabbi? So Rabbi, when it says Thursday, it means Thursday and Friday?
Yeah, Thursday and Friday. We learned that if we didn't speak it out on Tainus, it's good to speak it out now. It really means L'kavod Shabbos. But it was normal that people already started to get ready for Shabbos on Thursday. Yes. Now for
Rabbi?
Yes.
What's the difference in taich between L'saper and L'galea?
Saper means a haircut, to cut, and L'galech means to shave.
Are we not using L'galea in the sense of haircutting now?
Actually, let's keep our eyes open, a good observation, and there has to be a reason why this or that, but in this context, each one will mean both. My Tama, why over there? Why can't the Kohen or the Maimed person take a haircut or launder during the week? In other words, people then were off their regular work. So it's common for people to want to use their time better, to say, I'm working this week. Next week, anyways, I have to do something which will allow me some more extra free time. So let me delay my haircut, let me delay my laundering for the week that I'm serving in the Mishra. And what's the problem? The problem is that when this Kohen will begin doing the Avodah, he's unkempt. So the same thing is over here. We want for a person to enter Yom Tov with a proper haircut. A person without a haircut for 30 days or more is called a menuvel. Someone who's unkempt. It's not seemly. It's not nice. You're not groomed properly. Same thing with garments. We want you to enter Yom Tov with clean garments. So if you would be allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed, sometimes people would have delayed it dafka for Chol HaMoed. Now I know it's already late, but I have to speak out the following. Based on this comes the Rabbeinu Tam, and he says, so what happens? He's speaking about people who shave or trim their beards. So a haircut, most people, at least in his days, they would take a haircut, they're good for 30 days. And we're going to speak about those 30 days regarding a person who's in mourning for a parent. But the people who halachically, according to those who say that halachically you can trim your beards, or today with a machine, as long as it's not a razor, you take a haircut out of Yom Tov, you did everything right, and now on Chol HaMoed, it would be more comfortable to shave again or to trim your beard again. And the Rabbeinu Tam holds you are allowed to do that. Because the only reason why you may not do it is because they didn't want for you to delay it and not go into Yom Tov Minuvalim. This person did not go into Yom Tov Minuval. He groomed himself. The Tur argues with the Rabbeinu Tam, and we are machmir like the Tur, but it's good to be aware of that machlokes. Let's go weiter. If a person lost something and they were busy looking for it, so again, they didn't have that much time. Do we say even the honest since the person was engaged in something that they did not foresee? So he should be also like someone who came out of jail or someone who came over. He didn't have the time, and therefore this person should be given the heter and should be allowed to haircut and or launder on Chol HaMoed. It's not evident when a person is released from jail. Oh, everyone knows about it. The ikon is to remember this guy was in jail, whatever, however we work. But over here, people don't know. So there's like a marasayin or chash. So Amar Abaya is very much into the loy plug. He will not allow for this to happen. And the example that we are using is a din that we learned in Pesachim. What did we learn in Pesachim? That people wanted to bake their matzahs in a way that's called sadikin. Either the matzah itself was a designed matzah, or there was a design on the matzah. It was some sort of beautified matzah. And they said you can't do that because since from when you mix the water and the flour until when you have it fully baked, today we know we have the 18 minutes, If you're going to start making fancy matzahs, then it might become chametzik before it's baked. Problem is, or the question is, that the bakers in Baisus, they had forms in which they were able to make this beautiful design just like that in an instant. It did not take them time. So we learned them Psachim, they also are not allowed to do it. That's your classic loy plug. That Yoimru, what are we going to say? That Kol Asurike and Asurim, anyone who wants to make this design matzah is not allowed to do it. But only Sirike Baisus Mutarim, we can't say that. So therefore, Abai is trying to say that since the rule is, he's telling Rab Zera that you cannot haircut, you cannot launder. I know the Mishnah gave exceptions, but don't add exceptions. Okay. Ulataimeh counters the Gemara against Abaya. A person who only has one shirt. You only have one shirt. This is similar to the Rabbeinu Tam's question regarding cutting a hair that you want to cut again. You only have one shirt. You cleaned your shirt out of Yom Tov. But now, Chalamayit, it's dirty again. So we, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, we say, Mutter l'chapse b'choil shalmayit. Question is, if you say loy plug, so why don't we challenge that by saying, Hachinami yoimru kol asarik and asurin, but sariki baisus, only they are allowed to do it? So answers the Gemara, it's all about, is it evident that you are an exception? And indeed, answers the Gemara, ha'itman Allah, that Amar Mar Barabashi, that the reason why we allow a person who only has one shirt to re-clean their shirt, to launder the shirt again on Chalamayit, because the belt shows that this person only has one shirt. What's the belt? There's two pshatim, maybe even more. But when people had these long jalabas, Moroccan-looking long shirts, white bekishes, that was their garment. That was it. That's all there was. And the way they kept it closed is there was a belt on it. The belt in most shirts was inserted into two loops, and the belt did not need to be cleaned nothing near as often as the shirts themselves. So people that were not dirt poor and they were able to have two or more shirts, so whenever they cleaned shirt number one, they would remove the belt, and then they would put it into shirt number two. They didn't have to own two belts. You used your same belt. People who only had one shirt would sew the belt into the shirt, and when they would wash the shirt would be washed with the belt. So when you see a person washing the shirt with the belt, you know, that's a person that only has one shirt. So there's no maras ayin issue, and we don't say loy pluk. Ravashi learned the above topic in a different way. Boy, Rab Zera was asking, if the city's barber was the one that lost something, and everyone who got a haircut out of Yom Tov heard from the barber, I'm in a rush because I got to find my lost article. So it's already known by many people that this Uman lost something. Can this Uman give himself a haircut on Cholamayit? Even the Uman who Mucha Chamilsa. No, it's here. It's known because he serviced everyone out of Yom Tov and he mistamach fetched to everyone. I got to rush because I got to go look for my whatever I lost. Like Dilma, no. It's not as known as the examples given by the Mishnah. When someone comes out of jail, when someone arrives overseas, that's really known. This is not as known, and for that, teku. Okay, Medina Sayam. So we mentioned a person came overseas. It's not so pashit, as we'll see in a moment. If your trip was not a real needed trip, then just because you decided to go on a trip and you came back out of Yom Tov, lav dafka, you're going to have a heter. So says the Gemara, it seems that our Mishnah does not follow the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda, if a person comes from overseas, when on Cholamoyed or out of Yom Tov right before Shkiyam, says Rabbi Yehuda, lo yigaleya, he may not take a haircut on Cholamoyed. Why? Now the word reshus is used in an unusual way. Reshus means authority. Reshus means authority of others. Reshus means that something else compelled me to travel. One example will be Parnasa. But since a person who did not go on an obligatory trip, there was no reshus, there was no force in my trip. I went to a tour, and I ended up coming back on Cholamoyed. I have no such heter. The fact that our Mishnah did not mention that, the Mishnah did not differentiate, says the Gemara, our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Doesn't matter why you went. Omar Rava goes ahead and he argues with this opening statement of the Gemara, because Rava holds, that's the way we will learn the Gemara, that everyone agrees to the concept of Rabbi Yehuda. So either it means Rabbeinu HaKadosh did not go into details, but you have to limit the law of the Mishnah, or the Braisa that we quoted, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, our Mishnah argues with both opinions. But let's read Rava's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda in the Braisa. Lashoit means a person is going to Rome. We call that not to Rome, to the city Rome. R-O-A-M. He's spaziering. He's going to tour. He's going on a vacation. But just because you came back, who asked you to come back so late? I couldn't do it. The whole trip was not necessary. You're not allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Lim is zaynus. If a person needed to earn a living, that's lim is zaynus. Then you needed to make a trip. Divrei hakol mutal. Everyone will agree that it's, even though Rabbi Yehuda says shaloi b'reshus, that's not the meaning shaloi b'reshus. That was b'reshus. You were under a pressure. Loi nachluku. There is a machlokes in the Braisa, and that is laharvecha. Interesting concept. Harvecha means, how do you define this? I don't know. Larvecha means you have mezoinus, but you want to make another few dollars. You're wealthy, but you're not uber wealthy. That is the question. Mar medamale. Mar means Rabbi Yehuda considers this a person as if he went lashoit. You didn't need to go, so therefore you have no heter. Umar and the Chachamim in the Braisa medamale lechem mezoinus. That's the way Rava limits the machloikes of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim in the Braisa. And again, what does that mean for the Mishnah? Again, two ways. Well, let's go. Says the Gemara Meisvei, we're going to challenge Rava. Rava, I think you didn't understand the pshat correctly, because I have another Braisa. And in that other Braisa, it says, Omar Rebbe, or Tosefta, Rebbe's Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He writes that Nirin, I agree with the words of Rabbi Yehuda regarding cutting hair is asur. When when someone left voluntarily, there was no pressure for him to leave. And I agree with the Chachamim if a person left b'reshus. In other words, it sounds like they do argue everywhere, as the Gemara spells out. Now, what does it mean, shaloi b'reshus? Shaloi b'reshus means, like we said, there was no pressure for you to travel. Why? Because you're going just to tour. You're going to sightsee. No. But if that's the meaning, and Rebbe says, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda, well, that clearly implies that they argue. Elama, Rebbe paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. But you, Rava, said that if a person left, stopped to tour, I don't care when they came back. Never on the ship, they couldn't take a haircut. Who asked you to know? Didn't you say that they all agree that it's asur? And Rebbe therefore would not say, I rule like Rabbi Yehuda. He rules like everyone. Also doesn't work. Because if you left l'mezonos, if that would be the way you will translate shaloi b'reshus or b'reshus, again, everyone, you, Rava says, everyone agrees that it's mutter. Ela pshita, that the opening line of this Braisa where Rebbe says, Nidin divrei Rabbi Yehuda must be speaking about leharvecha, which is what Rava said. That's the area you already have mezonos. But you want to have mezonos b'harchava, but you don't need it. You only want it. Which is taka, very good. So far, so good. Problem is, you won't be able to continue reading the same Tosefta. Elo ema seifa. Rebbe continues by saying that nirin divrei chachamim kishiyatza b'reshus. And here again, what's the case of the seifa? If b'reshus means the way we understand it, b'reshus means you left under pressure. There was something outside of there was something in your circumstances that forced you. Reshus means there was some authority on top of you. If it means you went to get mezonos, again, what do you mean nidin divrei? Not nidin divrei. Rava says that they all agree mutter. It must mean el laharvecha. So if the case of the Reisha and the case of the Seifa is the same case, so what exactly is Rebbe saying? It doesn't fit. But didn't you just tell me that Rebbe said that I agree with Rabbi Yehuda in the case of harvecha? So does that not refute Rava's interpretation of their machloikes? Answers the Gemara, it does not refute Rava. Rava stands, Hachi Ka'amar. Rava, the Braisa, this Tosefta, is not telling you who Rebbe paskins like. No, This Braisa is telling you how Rebbe understood their machlokes. Actually, mamish like Rava. That Nirin Divrei Rabbi Yehuda li Rabbanan. Rebbe is saying that the Rabbanan don't even disagree with Rabbi Yehuda if a person left Shaloi B'Rishus, and that means a person left just the Torah. There is no. That's exactly what Rabbeinu Hakadosh is saying. Not that I paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. He's saying that there isn't even an argument, because if a person's trip was completely voluntary, then shafilu chachamim they only argued if a person left. There was a little amount of pressure. You were not obliged. You had enough money for Yom Tov, but you wanted to make another few dollars. And the same thing is in the safe of this Tosefta. That what Rabbi Yehuda also agrees. And Mainino, if a person had no money and they needed to make a business trip, Pasha to have money for Yom Tov, then also Rabbi Yehuda will agree that you are allowed to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed because your trip was a necessary trip. Actually, according to that, the Tosefta is actually the source of Rebbe's understanding. Atkan. Now, Amar Shmuel says Shmuel Katan Hanoiled B'Moed. Interesting case. A child is born on Chol Hamoed. We're not speaking about a child who medically must cut his or her hair, but we're speaking about a child that was born with relatively a lot of hair. And Rashi uses the words, and we see that the hair is causing a certain amount of distress, of tzar to the child. However you define that. So says Shmuel that if a child is born b'moed, mamish like the cases of our Mishnah, that when you did not have an option to do it prior, you can do it on Chol Hamoed. Here also muter legaleach b'moed. And we don't add to the cases of the Mishnah, like we were speaking about before, someone who lost an article. So Shmuel says it's included in the cases of the Mishnah. What's based on? The child was in jail. He was in the mother's womb. He only was freed on Chol Hamoed, which implies that only if the baby was born on Chol Hamoed. But if the baby was born prior and you had an opportunity to give this baby a haircut and you did not, again, why should the baby pay for the sins of the parents? Because it's only tzar. Tzar, you have to know how to define it. Maybe you can resolve it by putting on a cap. The baby, if the parents, let the parents have to schwitz more, put on a cap every 10 minutes because they had an opportunity. So is the statement of Shmuel. Explicit and implicit. Asks the Gemara on Shmuel, Masiv Rav Pinchas, and Rav Pinchas taught the following Braisa. Here is where we go make a crossover. We're starting between the laws of Chol Hamoed and the laws of Avelus. It says in the Braisa that Rav Pinchas taught all the people that are allowed to take a haircut during Chol Hamoed, they are also allowed to take a haircut during their mourning. So if a person was traveling and they arrived on Chol Hamoed and they became an oval, they can take a haircut. All of the hetedim of haircutting for Chol Hamoed is given to a mourner. Now we made this correlation. So now the Gemara says, what does that imply? That whoever is usher to take a giluach, sipur, haircut, shaving on Moed, will also be prohibited for cutting their hair during their times of mourning. In other words, the Braisa of Rav Pinchas is equating them together. Daf Yud Daled Amid Beis. Now we got a problem. The Amrat Katan is Pluta. We inferred from Shmuel's statement that we make this distinction regarding can you cut the hair of a baby? It depends. If the baby was born on Chol Hamoed, you could. If the baby was born prior to Yom Tov, enough time that you could have theoretically given that baby a little bit of a trim, then you would not be allowed anymore. Let's make that equation for Avelus. If that is true, Nimseis Avelus Neheges Bekatan. No, we're building a mountain on a mountain. We're making an equation, and we're presuming that all of the dinim will be alike, even though we never said that explicitly. Well, that would also imply that we would make the same distinction on a minor. Problem is, that the reason why, if a child, God forbid, is entering a period of avelus, part of that will be a din of kriya. So we rent the garment of a minor, not because there is an obligation on a minor to mourn, not even midrabana. There's nervous then, since you would like to inspire the onlookers, crying, feeling the tzad of the passing, which is the whole purpose of eulogizing, to make people cry. So when you rent the garments of a minor, the onlookers have agmas nefesh, which is the goal. Other than that, there's no obligation for a minor to mourn. So how do you resolve? Shmuel makes a distinction regarding Hilchos Chol HaMoed for a minor, for chinuch, and the Braisa of Rav Pinchas equates Chol HaMoed and Avelus, but this distinction should not be shayach because ein Avelus likoten. So indeed, Amar Ravashi, hold on. Of course, the Braisa is gavaldik, but mi katani ha asurin. Did the Braisa say that everything b'negei Hilchos Chol HaMoed will go over to Avelus? No. Dilma yesh mehem asur, yesh mehem mutar. Because, for example, a minor because of chinuch will be included in the dinam of Chol HaMoed, but we don't have Hilchos Avelus for minors. Says the Gemara. They have another version. Their version is that Amar Shmuel Katan muter legalchay b'moed, and Fakir Shmuel said loishna noilad b'moed v'loishna noilad meikara, that these restrictions are inapplicable to a minor. So if a minor has tzar, cut his hair, trim his hair, or her hair. Now, guys, people shouldn't jump about an upshetanish. People should just know that an upshetanish is something that was introduced many, many, many years later. Could be that great tzaddikim that were open, that were knowledgeable with Primius HaTorah also did not cut their hair until 3 years from time immemorial. Could be. But we're going to halach over here. And could be we're speaking about a girl. Same concept. Right. Omar of Pinchas, now that we have the opposite, Shmuel says that by a minor, there you can whatever you need to do to a minor. He attempted to bring a proof to Shmuel from the Braisa of Rav Pinchas. The Omar of Pinchas, since the Braisa says, the Braisa is making an equation between hair cutting, which is generally prohibited for a mourner. But there are certain heterim, and those will be the same heterim that we are given to every Jew during Chol HaMoed. Again, that implies that whoever may not take a haircut on Moed may not take a haircut during one's period of mourning. So now, so if one would have argued with Shmuel and would have said that even a minor's hair, if it's causing the minor distress, you may not trim it on Chol HaMoed, and you would then pass over the same rule to Avelus. Him says Avelus noyeges bekatan, which cannot be because no one will disagree with this. V'tanya mikaron lekatan. The only reason why kriya ripping the garments is done by a minor, it's only because of agmas nefesh to evoke or to inspire grief by the onlookers, not because of any type of mourning for a minor. So that's a raya. So Ravashi says not a raya. There is an equation, but who says it's regarding all the cases? Mikatoni ha asurim dilma yesh mem asur yesh mem mutar. Very good. The kids said, now that we began learning a connection, just to get the flow. I mean, the Mishnah didn't speak about Avelus, so we got Chol HaMoed. Now that we brought the Braisa of Rav Pinchas, okay, so now let's speak about mourning. I just want to say like this, that we'll see this clearly in the next daf. Kriya is not connected to the period of Shiva at all. And we'll get to that because there's Aninos, there's Avelus. Today in halacha, when you use the term Avelus, it only refers to someone after the burial. Kriya is not done by a novel at all. Kriya is done only before the burial. If you didn't do it before, you do it afterwards. But Kriya used to be done right at the passing, and at a certain period of time, it became the Minhag Yisrael that Kriya is done during the burial, prior to the burial, during the burial. But anyways, let's come back over here. Says the Gemara, the big statement. Avel einoi noyeg avelusei beregel. Again, we're putting together this correlation, and perhaps this is the deeper connection between Avelus and Chol HaMoed. An Avel may not practice the laws of Avelus during Yom Tov. Now, first of all, I want you to know that, again, we're learning Gemara. People know the halacha, sadly, so they're not going to get this. They're going to say, what are you talking about? The regel cuts off Avelus. I know. That's Daf Chav Gimel. We're not up to there yet. We're learning Daf Yud Dalet. Here, the question is, we don't know yet that the regel cuts it off. We know that on Shabbos, let me speak out this. On Shabbos, someone who's in Shiva has to mourn, but not Bifaresia. Yom Tiv is different. Yom Tiv, it's not that you don't mourn in public. But Dvarim Shebetzina, for example, that a person who's in mourning may not have marital relations, if they're married, continues on Shabbos. They may not have marital relations. On Yom Tiv, according to many Rishonim, already Machlokas Rishonim, Bechlal, there are no laws of Avelus on Negel. Why? Because it says, V'samachta b'chagecha. And even though Shabbos, we have a concept of oineg, the divrei Kabbalah, the Karasal Shabbos oineg, the word simcha is not written by Shabbos. And if you want to understand something, many times you understand something by understanding its opposite. So basically, Avelus and Simcha are opposites. And that's the real link of our sugya. So we're commanded, V'samachta b'chagecha. It's impossible to experience what the Torah calls Simcha if you are then experiencing Avelus, mourning. It's opposite sides of the coin. Shabbos is not the opposite of Simcha. I'm sorry, Avelus is not the opposite of Shabbos. It's different. You can't do it Befaresia, but Yom Tiv, Simcha, and Avelus contradict each other. That's the real link of the whole Pedic now. So we're learning Mesechus Moed Katan. It's a Gavaldik. Everything we will learn, let's learn it in a positive, that all of the things that we're going to be learning about, the opposite has to be done on Yom Tiv, because Yom Tiv is the opposite of Avelus. Now, the Gemara clarifies further the statement of Rav Ashi. When we are saying that there's no laws of Avelus on Yom Tiv, including Chol Hamoed. Again, I'm saying this, there's really a Machlokas Rishonim, like always, but that's the way we're learning our Gemara. There are two scenarios. There's a scenario of someone who was already in the Shiva or in the Shloishim. A person is already mourning and now comes the Yom Tiv. So we are saying that you have to interrupt the mourning because you got to celebrate Yom Tiv. Or there can be a person who entered Yom Tiv, everyone is alive, and during Yom Tiv he became a novel. Either case, this rule stands. And my friends, again, not only does this rule stand, but we're going to continue the sugya on Daf Chav Gimel. It goes beyond this, but we're not there yet. So says the Gemara, if a person was already in mourning, all right, in other words, it was a pre-existing Avelus, comes now Yom Tiv, Rav Ashi is correct. And in other words, Yom Tiv will suspend, as of now, at least suspend. Halachically, it does more than that, but it suspends mourning. Why? Because Asi Asei Deravim, the mitzvah v'samachta b'chagecha is a positive commandment, and it's a positive commandment for all the Jewish people. It's called an Asei of everyone. And that overrides, that supersedes an Asei the Yachid. Asei, here we begin. Sounds from our Gemara that mourning is midoraisa. Because we're calling this taka a asay, it's only from the avelim, so it's weaker. That's the top toisvis here. Asay di yachid says toisvis mashma the avelus ikasay midoiraisa. Because if mourning is only midrabanan, as is the opinion of many Rishonim, then the Gemara should have said something even better. And we'll leave it at that. And Tosfos figures out how that's not the case. Tosfos says that really even the regel is also midrabanan, because midoiraisa, the way you celebrate Simcha is by having karbanos, and anything beyond that is not a pure biblical application of the samachta b'chagecha. Tosfos just wants to bring us to our awareness, and just like we mentioned, when it comes to Chol Hamoed, right, this whole machlokas rishonim that goes throughout the whole Masechta is the obligation of not working Cholamoid, biblical or rabbinical, you have a machlekes here regarding mourning with many opinions. Aninos lekula alma, this period of mourning before the burial on the day of the passing is for sure midai raisa.
Okay, what if a Rebbe passes away, and then isn't that law apply to everyone to mourn?
Everyone for a short amount of time, Kevin. Again, machlekes, not midai raisa, not midai raisa. There's going to be people that hold that for the 7 relatives, avelus is midai raisa only for 1 day. There's many opinions as to the level of obligation. So this is one of the places you can pick off. That's one of the sources. You can resolve it, but it's mashma asay. Now, the avelus tahashta, if a person began Yom Tiv, and during Yom Tiv, God forbid, the person becomes an avel, here also Rav Ashi's statement makes sense. Because if the person would have had to keep the laws of mourning, what would that mean? It would mean that Avelus supersedes Yom Tiv. How can that happen? And it should not have the koyach, the dochi yasei the rabim. So B'kitzur Rav Ashi's statement is the premise, is the base for something that we're going to pick up a few daf ahead. There is no Avelus on Yom Tov. Next, Menuda, like we mentioned, laws of mourning. The laws of a person who was put into a ban that's called either a nidui or a cherem or a shamta. We're going to be using the words nidui. We're going to learn on Daf Tezayin a lot more about this. A menuda mau sheyinhoig niduyoi beregel. Will the laws of a nidui, will they also be superseded by the Yom Tiv or not? Is it similar to Avelus regarding this heter? Amar Rabbi Yosef Tashema. It says in Abraisa, Donin in Nefashis, and Vidini Makis, and Vidini Memamis, that An Cholamoyed, Beis Din could convene to adjudicate both capital cases, cases in which if the party is found guilty, they're going to get flogged, monetary cases. Now, a nidui, one of the reasons why someone is put on a ban is if he was found guilty in a monetary case and he was told to pay up, and it's not that he's saying, I don't have. He's disregarding the Beis Din. That would be a reason to put someone in a ban. Says the Gemara, now that we know from a Braisa that on Cholamoyed you can adjudicate a monetary case. So there's always a possibility that someone will not listen to. And the counter, the tool that Beis Din has will be Misham Tinale. They would now ban him. They would ban him on Cholamoyed. So now, in other words, he's trying to prove that if you could put a person in a ban on Cholamoyed, if a person was already in a ban, then Yom Tov should not supersede it. Right? In other words, if someone is already Mishumas Va'asi, if someone is already in a ban, still, if we were to say that the Yom Tov will supersede the ban like it does for Avelos, so what? How would you even be able to lechatchila put a person in a ban on Cholamoyed? Hashta mishamtina le'anan doesn't work. Is that all this is a proof that a pre-existing ban does remain in effect. That's his proof. The proof of Rabbi Yosef. No. When the Braisa is saying that we can adjudicate a case, maybe it only means la'ayune b'dinei. It only means to look into it, but not to give a verdict. Not to give a verdict means it's not even possible for a person to be banned on Cholamoyed for not listening to a verdict if it's not given. And I'll prove to you that this Braisa is not even allowing for a verdict to be given. Because if the Braisa actually means that Beis Din not only could convene, but Beis Din can go until the end. How can that apply when it comes to capital cases or hachinami, that it's possible for them to find someone guilty and to kill him on Cholamoyed? That can be. Guys, Mimna B'Simchas Yantiv is not on the guilty party. It's on the judges. The judges, after they give a verdict, that day they have to fast. Fasting goes against Simchas Yantiv. The Tanya Rabbi Kiva Omer, Minayin l'Sanhedrin, Shahar Guas HaNefesh, after you execute their ruling, that during that day, they may not taste any food that day, as it says, and the answer is, it says in Parshas Kedoshim, there is a negative commandment that is applied to so many different applications. That's this pasuk, Loi soichlu al hadam, don't eat over the blood. It means many things, including that the judges who found someone guilty in a Sanhedrin, that person was actually executed, that day they may not eat. So he says this Braisa cannot be speaking about following through. Elot must mean when it comes to din and nefashis, it's only la'ayune b'dinei. So here also by monetary cases, which would be one of the main reasons why someone might be put on a ban, it only means la'ayune b'dinei. So there is no proof from this Braisa. Counters the Gemara, so Rav Yosef counters to Abaya, no, you're not learning correct shot. Because if you think that a Beis Din is allowed to convene, but not follow through all the way with a verdict, that's asur. You're not allowed to delay justice. No, it's not beginning a trial is less problematic. Delaying the beginning of a trial is much less problematic. Once a trial begins, Beis Din has to go through the steps, and if they know what the ruling will be, they have to give it right away. Imkein nimtzeis ma'anes dinoi, delaying justice. You have a kasha, if that will be the case, how can they indeed put someone to death on Chol Hamoed? Will it not mean that they will have to fast? So the Gemara says what they will have to do is you can delay it a few hours. That also meets Afro Ma'ayna Medina. They look at it in the morning. And since and once they know that they're going to find this person guilty, and they know that the death row doesn't exist in Yiddishkeit. Once a person is judged to be put to death, they are taken out of court straight to their punishment. But they have to approximate. Let's say it's going to take them from their verdict until the person being put to death. They know it's going to take, 30 minutes. What they are allowed to do is they came to a verdict 10 a.m., 2 p.m. They lay it a little bit and eat. That day they eat. They're not fasting. They give the verdict prior to Shkia. Once Shkia comes, they can eat again. That's how they resolve it. And before they give a verdict, that little delay is okay. They go into their homes, and they drink that day. And bishkia means prior to, but near the times of sunset, and then they kill him. So yes, they follow through on a judgment. So yes, I have a proof. So Abaya challenges Rabbi Yosef, hold on. It says in our Mishnah, one of the examples for people that are what? They are allowed to take a haircut because their ban was removed. Now, he understood that every Yom Tov automatically removes a ban. That's how he learned Pshat. It's suspended. So Rabbi says, no, not that anyone who's in a nidoi, all of the laws are automatically released by the sages for all. No, the word is for him. In other words, our Mishnah speaking about a case that someone was put in a ban. Again, we're going with Rabbi Yosef. Yom Tov does not supersede a nidui. The person has to keep the ban. During Chol Hamoed, he paid what he owed. And once you fulfilled your obligations, Beis Din remove the ban. So therefore, we are all siding with Rabbi Yosef how a nidui is more chamur than avelus when it comes to this din of Yom Tov. Next, mitzayda. It's always going to be avol, menuda, mitzayda. Mitzayda mao sheyanhig sharati beregel. All of the rules of a mitzayda that we'll see more in next daf. We know you have to go mechutz lamachne. You're not allowed to cut your hair. That's a mitzayda. That's muchlak. You have to rent your garments. Is it suspended on Yom Tov? So Amar Abaye Toshima says in a Mishnah, Vahanazir, our Mishnah, or Vahamitzoida, that goes out from his tumah to his taram, he's allowed to launder his clothing, which implies Havimei Tumasai, then yes, then he cannot cut his hair. It doesn't suspend it, which is not necessarily true. Maybe the Mishnah should be learned on a level of Loimi Boy Kamat. Loimi Boy Havimei Tumasai Deloy Noeg. Because maybe Yom Tov supersedes all of the laws of Mitzayda, but if a person becomes pure, if the seventh day, the final day, is on Chol Hamoed, maybe we should make Exeda. What will be the problem? Because one of the things you have to do on the seventh day, aside of cutting your hair, is bringing karbanos. And there's a fear that now these karbanos are allowed to be brought on Chol Hamoed. They may not be brought on Yom Tov. And for some reason, we are afraid that the Kohen might erroneously bring it on Chol HaMoed. There might be a Chilul Yom Tov, and the solution there might be to delay it. Maybe make Exedom, not to cut her here, Shema Yasher Korban Oisov. So that's why the Mishnah has to say that even in this case, you do. But there's no proof from our Mishnah. Either way, let's go another few lines. Amar Rava, another attentive proof for Amad Soida, whether Yom Tov supersedes or not, says in a Braisa, in the Parsha of Tzoras, there's an extra word, Ve'hat Sarua. Chazal tell us, it comes to teach us that even a Kohen Gadol, if the Kohen Gadol has the signs of leprosy, he's also included in that Parsha. Okay, so, Kohen Gadol Chol Hashana is just like a Jew on Regel. Look at this equation. Amazing, huh? A Kohen Gadol, like we said, the Samachta B'Chagecha, the service, the avodah of a Kohen Gadol makes the Kohen Gadol like every Jew on Yom Tov. How do we know that? I'll prove it to you. Because we have a Mishnah that says that even though an oinain, a person who's in this highest level of mourning on the day of the passing, a Kohen may not offer karbanos. Kohen Gadol is the exception. A Kohen Gadol is allowed to offer a korban even when he's an oinan, even though he still may not eat consecrated meat. Indeed, Shema Mino. So what do we see? So if a Kohen Gadol is like Yom Tov, and the Kohen Gadol, the Hatshadu Rabbi's Kohen Gadol, is a raya that the Kahuna Gedoyla does not supersede Soras. Regel does not supersede Soras. Is indeed Shema Mino, no Yitzarat Regel Shema Mino. So we have an interesting thing. Avelus is pushed aside plus by a Yom Tov. A Nidui is not. A Metzoida is not. Avelus is the most lenient of these three. And that's where we'll leave over here. And God willing, a lot more to be continued.
Go, Rabbi.
We're good. The audio is good, huh? Hope so.
For the most part, yes.
It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, Baruch Hashem, we're on the bottom of the page. Okay, vamos. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Tezvav. We left off on Daf Yud Dalid Amid Beis. We are 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We began this correlation between Chol HaMoed and Avelus. That opened up the topic of mourning. We also are going to become very much aware that there are many similarities between the laws of someone who's in mourning, like the laws of someone who was, God forbid, put into a ban by Beis Din. That ban is called a nidoi. That ban is sometimes called a shanta. That ban is called a chedim. More details on tomorrow's daf. But if someone is in a ban, there are many behaviors in which he or she will be restricted in, similar to someone who's in mourning. And likewise, a Metzoida, someone who was afflicted with the signs of Tzoras and was rendered a Metzoida by the declaration of a Kohen Dafka, as we learned in Moed Katan, they share similar rules. And the way the Gemara is going to unpackage all of the detailed rules will be speaking about a rule by an Avel and trying to find out whether that detail is also the same by a Menuda and the same by a Metzoida. So we're going to be learning today about the laws of you're not allowed to cut your hair. We're going to learn about the obligation that used to be practiced by mourners known as Atifas Haroish. There was a certain unique way that they would have their head covered during the entire Shiva time. Not only was the head covered, but the covering would go over the forehead, over their nose, all the way down to their lips. We're going to learn about an isur of an oval to put on tefillin, not only of an oinain, but even of a oval. We're going to, again, there are going to be certain topics that in later dafim we're going to revisit with more details. Nowadays, just to know, it's good, even in halacha, there are some who opine that on the day of the burial, which is when Avelus begins, like we mentioned in last year, when there's a passing of one of the 7 close relatives, the relatives are called an oinen. You enter the period of aninos, of very strong grief. An oinen, which we're not going to focus on today at all, is exempt from many mitzvahs. An oinen doesn't make a bracha prior to eating. An oinen doesn't make a bracha after eating food. Wow, an oinen doesn't put on tefillin. I know that there are certain exceptions. We're not going to go into all of that. An avo, at least on the day of burial, according to many, may not put on tefillin. May not put on, that's what we're going to be learning about. He's asur b'tefillin. Nowadays, an avo, after the burial, our minig will be that in private they will put on tefillin. There are many details that people know them and hug him, but we're going back to the sources. We're going to be learning about the prohibition on an avo of properly inquiring the welfare of one's fellow. She'ilas shalom does not mean good morning. She'ilas shalom means to really inquire, how are you? That's something that an avel may not do. From there, that Amma already says that nowadays an avel doesn't even say good morning. Neither should the people who go into a house of avelus. The normal tzafra l'maratov should not be said there. We'll speak out some details when we learn the daf. There's a prohibition on learning Torah. There's another chiyuv not related to avelus. It's prior avelus, connected more to aninus, known as the obligation of renting one's garments, chiyuv kriya. There was an obligation in the times of Chazal for people who are in mourning to have not only their bed overturned, but all of the beds in the house were overturned. There's a prohibition of doing work, not like work Shabbos Yom Tov Chol HaMoed, another definition of work, but there is a prohibition on an oinen and on an avel of doing work. There's a prohibition to wash oneself, isur echitza. There is an isur of putting on leather shoes. There is an isur for married people to have marital relations. And many, many other such details that we will learn today. We're going to get it all together. We're not only going to learn Hilchas Avelus, but we're going to then go, what about by the Menuda? What about by the Mitzvah? And let's get going. Chavra Freilach, daf Yud Daled on the base, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara gives a statement. Avel asur bitis poiris. An avel may not cut his or her hair. Until when? Also, there's details we'll speak out soon. How do we know that from me? The when the Torah records the passing of Nadav and Avihu. This is after Matan Torah. Oh, and God Almighty said, Roshechem al tifro, not only the Kohen Gadol, but even Elazar and the Summer, who were also in the state there of Aninus and of Avelus for the passing of their son, their brother. God tells them, don't leave your hair unshorn. Why did God have to tell it to them? So we're going to extrapolate by the fact that God made exceptions. You know the rule from the exception. Remember this. So we're going to learn certain statements that Hashem made after the passing of Nadav and Avihu. Let me just give you a heads up. We're going to learn that the Navi Yecheskel was foretold by God that his wife, whom he loved dearly, was going to pass away. And that was like a mashal of the loss of the Beis HaMikdash that was going to happen later. And Hashem told Yecheskel how he should not keep some of the regular laws of mourning. They're also, from what God told Yecheskel to do or not to do, we know that the opposite is by Avelus. Amazing. Okay, so let's go. Daf Tezvav. So we established that a ovel cannot cut his or her hair. What about menudin u'mitzayrayim? We're putting them together. Mahin b'tisplayers. Are they allowed to cut their hair? Asks Tosfos, what kind of question is that? It's a beferish pasuk in Chumash. The Torah says that Roishoi Yihiyeh Parua, the Mitzayra, has to leave his hair unshorn. May not cut his hair, pasuk in the Chumash. What's the question? Answers Tosfos that we will see on Daf Tezvav, Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, how to interpret that verse. And therefore, our Gemara is following Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't interpret it the way we learn it when we learn in Cheder. And Enochanami, according to Rabbi Eliezer, there's no question. For sure, a Mitzayra may not cut his hair. So Tashema, it says in Abraisa, Menudin u'Mitzrayim, clear. Asurim l'saper, they may not cut their hair, nor ulachabis, nor may they launder their clothing. Furthermore, okay, that's already the answer, but now we're going to continue learning the Braisa. What happens if someone was put in a ban and he passed away prior to the ban being released? So this says in the Braisa, Beis Din will stone his grave. I want to clarify, or the Gemara clarifies, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, this is a clarification, not that they loishe yamdu olav gal avonim. It's not that they put a pile of stones on his kavod the way they did it by Achan. Achan was the one that violated the vow, and he took very wrongfully the spoils from the victory over Yericho. So there he was stoned to death. He was chayiv skila, and they put a pile of stones on his body. That's not what the Braisa means over here. If a person who was in a chedem, let's say because they were owed money in a Beis Din, and they defied the Beis Din, so Beis Din banned them, and they passed away in their ban. So what's one of the consequences of someone who's put in a ban? That others have to stay away from him. You can't do that by burial. You have to bury the person. So to substitute the ban of staying away, they would put one stone on the kavod as he's banned. Ella Beis Din Shulchan Manichan Evan Gedoyla, they put one large stone on his arm. And that's Lalam Decham. And why did they do that? Bottom line is, without going into these details of what you do to someone who passed away in a chedem, is that menudim and mitzayroyim, we already see here, cannot cut their hair, nor can they launder. We already have that clarified. Next, nudim, next thing. Person who's in mourning, she's obligated to wrap his head. He takes the head covering. So everyone, aside of wearing a yarmulke, there's something called a top hat, a second covering. He has to sit during the entire Avelus period in with such a covering that didn't only cover the head, but it covered the front part of his face all the way down to the lips. That Amar, just to go quickly, that Amar writes that nowadays we don't do it. It's very, very unusual, and therefore it evokes a certain actually sense of mockery, which is very unusual. If it's a mitzvah, it's a minhag. However, the Shach does write that a person who's in mourning, I would use the word fedora hat. The advantage of a fedora hat is that the front of the hat at least covers a little bit of the forehead. He advocates for people sitting avelus should sit with such a hat. Some sort of atipa sorosh. Anyways, the meaning is people are not machmir. B'chlal, as a rule, we are lenient when it comes to the laws of avelus. But let's go right. How do we know that? Here we go. Again, it's from what God told Yecheskel. The fact that Hashem told Yecheskel, after foretelling the passing of his beloved wife, that v'loi sate al safam, don't veil yourself until your lips, and they would cover it. And don't do that. Is arayah that everyone else should. So now the question is, what about a menuda? Menuda ma'abatifa saroish. Amar Rabbi Yosef Tashema says in a brayse, the following people. This is a brayse regarding, remember, kindness after the 13-day fast days, and still there's no rain. So the Talmidei Chachamim took upon themselves to, until the end of that season, where it's not shaykh to rain anymore, to behave in a certain way. And what is that? Misatfim, they wrap themselves. So what do we see over here? When there's no rain, not having rain or some sort of communal calamity is viewed as if Hashem is putting us in a chedem. That's the way we view it. And the fact that they sit with their heads wrapped is arayah that a menuda should have atipa sorosh. Amalei Abaya, no, don't compare one type of excommunicated to another type of excommunication. Dilma menuda la shamayim, if the heaven bans a person, maybe that's considered more chamur. Guys, maybe. I want to say maybe, emphasize, because we're going to see, and today's daf, the opposite logic. The point of Abaya is someone who is interpreting his circumstances as if God temporarily is putting that person, God forbid, into some sort of chedem. Don't compare that type of menuda to someone who was put in a ban from Beis Din. And to add on that, in halacha, like we mentioned them last year, there's someone who doesn't pay a financial obligation in Beis Din who's put in a ban. That's one type of menuda. There is another type of menuda that someone is mevaze talmidei chachamim. Sometimes they're also put into a ban. Even that, we don't compare one case to the other. Let's go weiter. What about a mitzvah? Mitzvah ma'abati pasaroish. So here the Gemara's proof will be from a pasuk. When it says in Parshas Tazria, regarding the mitzvah muchlat, that va'al safam ya'ate, that he should veil himself all the way down to his lips. Mechlal shechayev bati pasarosh shma mino amachayev. Next, avol also lo niach tefillin. Again, guys, the good thing is this will be daf chaf aleph. So a heads up. I want to give you the bottom line is that the din today, where there might be restrictions regarding tefillin, is not on the whole shiva. That will be the only on the first day. Certainly prior to burial. And parenthetically, there were people who did all of the burial preparations. After all the burial preparations were done, they were told by the Rebbe in private to put on tefillin, even when they were prior to Avelus, when they were still in Aninus. But here we're focusing primarily on an Avel, and an Avel, let's begin with there are restrictions even on the day of burial, after the burial is putting on tefillin. How do you know that? Here also, since the Merciful One told Yecheskel how he should be different, your wife is going to pass away, his wife was going to pass away, and Pe'er Chabush Olecha, where your glory is tefillin, is Araya Mechlal, the Chula Alma, when they are in mourning, they're not allowed to put on tefillin. What about a menuda? Menuda ma'al with tefillin, tekel. What about a mitzvah ma'al with tefillin? Second to last narrow line, Toshima. It says in the Brais, in the Pasuk, the word ve'hatzorua, which is not necessary, comes Torah Shabal Peh. And we had this in yesterday's daf. L'rabois koyin gadol, that a koyin gadol is also included in all of the laws of tzaras. Oh, the God of you, perumim. Let's go weiter. When it says his garment should be perumim, perumim means mikuraim. That a mitzvah has to rent his garments. Now, v'roisha yehi perua. That's the places that we quoted. Here we will see the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. How do you interpret these words? That his head should be perua. Perua means unshorn. Ein priya elegidol seir, unhindered growth. Clear? Okay, we're not up to tefillin yet. That is Rabbi Eliezer. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and he says, no, that's not the meaning of perua. How do I know that? Because since the Torah says roishoy yihiyah, the word yihiyah means being. But roishoy, it says the word havoya when it comes to the head. And it says 2 lines above in the pasuk, begod of yihiyu, again, havoya bebeged. So we compare one to the other. Mahavoya hamor bebeged. Beged is something outside of the person. Af havoya beroish must refer to something outside of the person, not the hair. The hair is part of the person. Now, in other words, Rabbi Akiva didn't say what it means. It does not mean hair. What's outside the person? L'choyret means tefillin. That a mitzvah may not wear tefillin. That's the answer, at least according to Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rav Papa, that's not what Rabbi Akiva meant. Loi. Maybe a mitzvah does wear tefillin. What type of outside of the person, the garment, is he restricted in wearing? Either akumasa, some sort of fancy hat. Sudara is the regular turban, even though we said he's chayiv in atifa saroish, but the atifa saroish was not from the regular hat. It was an unusual hat. And that's exactly what it means according to Rabbi Akiva. You don't wear your regular hat. You don't wear your regular turban. Right. By the way, we don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva. We paskin like Rabbi Eliezer that parua means hair. Let's go weiter. Next thing. Avel asur b'sheila shalomon. Avel may not inquire about the welfare of another. Even when in English you say, hi, how are you? The truth is you don't mean how are you. The proof is if the person begins to tell you how he is, you're going to say, whoa, 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 whoa. It's just a hi, gay pfeifen. That's how are you. How are you means 0, -0. But if you taka mean how are you, that's the issue. But like we mentioned in the introduction, that the Ramah says that the normal greetings, not how are you, that's Sheila Shalom, but Safra de Maritov, which means good morning. The meaning is we also don't do that. But Me'ikir Adin, what an Avel may not do, nor what may not be done in the house of a mourner, is inquiring about the peace of the other. How do we know that there's such a restriction? Because God Almighty told Yecheskel again, prior to him becoming a novel, he will become a novel. And God tells him, hey onoik doim, or hey oneik doim, grieve and be silent. Now here it's unusual. Up until now and later, we go in the opposite direction. God told Yecheskel the opposite. Here it means actually what it says. Hey, grieve and be silent. The silence from two things. Silence from inquiring the peace of your fellow. Silence from the words of Torah. Taka, what it is. Menuda, let's go now to Menuda. Menuda Mavashila Shalom. Amar Rav Yosef Tashema. It's amazing. We're going back to Masechtas Tainus. It says in Tainus V'Sheila Shalom that the Talmidei Chachamim, after everyone kept the 13 fasts, right? The three and the 7. Still it didn't rain. So until Pesach, until when it's not shaykh to rain anymore, so they would not B'Sheila Shalom, Shemen Al-Chaveiroi, they would not inquire the welfare, because it's as if they were put into a band by God. So here you see that a menuda is limited. He may not practice Sheila Shalom. And here again says Abaya, don't compare menuda lashamayim to menuda from a Beis Din. Dilma menuda lashamayim shani, because that could be chamer. Point. What about a mitzayda? Mitzayda ma b'sheila shalom. Tashmat says in a brayso regarding the mitzayda. We just quoted this verse. The al shafam ya'ate, that the mitzayda has to have the veil down to his lips. So that's the pshat. Comes along Torah Shemal Pan, it adds. Why down to the lips? Because it's an indication that we want for your lips to be cleaving one to the other. We want for the person to be silent, which means he should be like a menuda, like an oval, and he's also b'sheila shalom. So clearly, a mitzayda may not inquire shalom from his fellow. Hold on, why don't we use this braisa as a source that a menuda is also b'sheila shalom? So a frek the Gemara of an ifshim in a menuda. Answers the Gemara, no, you're not reading it correctly. Nik Tani doesn't say that Sha'asur, that is Asur and Sheila Shalom. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say clearly that a menuda is Asur with Sheila Shalom. All it says is that a menuda generally is like a menuda and like a novel, but it could only refer to other dinim. And also a mitzvah is Asur and Sheila Shalom. But it's not clear that the Isur Sheila Shalom goes also on the menuda, which is why we never brought this b'rais. Next halacha, Avel is not allowed to learn Divrei Torah. Now again, just to know there are details, there are exceptions. All of the halachas connected to mourning is something that an Avel is allowed to learn. V'chulei. So let's go. Avel also Divrei Torah. Here also, me the Kamer Rachman Yecheskel. Since God, the same verse told Yecheskel doim, right? Hey, make doim. Silence means from both, including don't speak Divrei Torah. Now let's go further. What about a menuda? Is a menuda prohibited in learning Torah? Now what we learned in last daf is that, for example, avelus is interrupted by regel. Nidui is not interrupted by regel. Here we're going to see that a menuda is more lenient. An oval may not learn Torah. A menuda, Amar Rabbi Yosef, clearly it says in a braisa, menuda shoina, menuda is allowed to teach others. Now, there is a limit how close they can get. We'll learn again in Daf Tezayin. People have to keep away 4 amas. But a menuda can teach and he can be a student. Torah, v'shainim loy. Similarly in work, niskar, right? He may be hired by others. V'niskarim loy, others may be hired by him. And now we're getting a little bit off topic. We're going into a detail of nidui. And again, tomorrow, but here, a nidui is generally for 30 days. Let's go into the classical case. Beis Din says, Reuven pay Shimon. Reuven says to Beis Din, who are you? I reject the ruling. They put him into a nidui. 30 days go, they renew it for 30 days. At some point, whether after 2 times or after 3 periods of 30 days, they up the level of the ban, and now they put him into a chedim. So what now? It says the Braisa that once you become muhram, what's the chumrah of muhram? A higher ban. They're already loy shaina and v'loy shainam loy nisker v'loy niskarim loy. Avol, not avol. Avol Even during the period of Muhram, he can always learn for himself. Never to interrupt Torah learning. Actually, the Rosh and the Rifs have a version, Sholayafsid, not to lose, because as we know, Chavra, it's hard enough to retain when we learn. When you stop learning, you forget. My teacher, Rab Shlomo Strauss, my Belzer teacher, used to tell me the pasuk of King Solomon that if you abandon the Torah one day, it abandons you for 2 days. They got the exact lashon, Yom Yermayim. He gave a great mashal that if 2 chaverim are together and you walk 1 day, so how far are you away? 1 day travel. But if when you are walking in one direction, your chaver is walking at the same time in the opposite direction, then after 1 day, you're distant 2 days. In other words, when we don't learn, it's not just that the Torah stays in and we walked away. We walk away, the Torah, God forbid, walks away, and oh my God. So this guy never has to stop learning. Let's go weiter.
Rabbi, just a quick question. Is there ever a case where someone excommunicated has to physically leave the community?
Well, not exactly the way you're wording it, because people have to keep away from his Dalad Amis, and he's not included in a minyan. But what do you mean by leave? Let's leave that for tomorrow. Weiter. Okay. Now, even the muhram who already cannot be hired by others, cannot hire others, what about he should starve to death? Not everyone has a bank account with money. So epis can always work. I have a little store that he can keep on running on his own, for him to have an income. And the example that we give, Amara, for example, that there was an area called Aravais. In Aravais, water was not plentiful. So people would sell water there. It's a big chiddush. Now we're so used to it. We buy water. They go figure. Bottles of water with plastic poison, and we pay money for it. But then no one bought water. But in Arabot, he can sell water bepaska da Arabot. In the market of Aravos, there they needed water. He can do that, and people paid very little. Today you pay a fortune for water. But then it's just an example of a little bit of work is allowed to him to do for himself. Shmamino. Okay, so we see clearly again that a menuda, yes, is not as chamur as an oval. In this halacha, he is allowed to learn and to teach. Next. But Tashma says in a Brais, based on the pasuk in Vo'es Chanon, where it says that we should make it be known to our children and to our grandchildren. We have a chiyuv to be involved in the chinuch of our eneklach. Now what? We should always let them know the day that we stood in front of God in Sinai. One of the names of Sinai is Chodev. So what do we see from over there? That the learning of Torah has to always be similar to the Sinai moment. In what sense? Just like when we stood around Mount Sinai, we experienced Ema, dread, Yira, Reses, trembling, Zeya means schwitzing. So every time a person learns the mode, the mindset, I know we say freilach, it's not a contradiction. There has to be a lot of joy, but there has to be a level of reverence. Now, what goes against the reverence? So it's an interesting concept. The feeling that someone feels right after a marital relation, that is not reverence. We're going to use the word that's frivolity. Not negative, but that's called frivolity. So therefore, mikan omru, that hazovin, there's the bodily discharge. Or hamitzoida, that's already because of tuma. Uboy ale nida, so a man who had a relation, even b'shoigeg, with a woman who's a nida, there, that person becomes tamei mamish like a nida for 7 days. They are allowed to read Torah Nevim Ksuvim, and they are allowed to learn Medrash and Shas, Halachas, and Agadois, because just because a person has this seminal emission like a Zav, that's not frivolity. So bodily discharges don't contradict the feeling of Emayira, Reses, and Zia. But about Keri, he's not allowed to learn Torah. So clearly the Braisa says that a Mitzvah is allowed to learn Torah. Now, before we go on, there's a big Bamba Kasha. If a Balkeri is not allowed to learn Torah, so what about the Boy Ale Nidois? Boy Ale Nidois is also a Balkeri. And the answer is no. The Boy Ale Nidois is referring to someone who had a relation, God forbid the Mezid, even God forbid, or B'shoigeg, wasn't his fault, but he had a relation. And he went to the mikvah. Once you go to the mikvah, the level of the opposite of Ema, Yira, Reses and Zeya is resolved with the mikvah. He's still Tamei because he was Boyel Einida. Pseder, he can still learn Torah. Let's go back. Next thing. Avel Asur B'Tich Boises. An Avel may not launder his clothing. How do we know that? So the Chsiv, as it says, now this is a very tragic incident for people to learn Nach. We should all learn Nach. We have to learn Nach. That after that there was a period of time after the story of Amnon and Tamar that David HaMelech pushed away his son Avshalom, who later made a terrible rebellion. And Yoav, the general, was trying to reconcile Avshalom with his father David HaMelech. And it says that he got involved a wise woman. It says Vayishlach Yoav Tekoya. He sent to the city of Tekoya and he asked to come from there a Isha Chachama. And by Yomer Eleh, and what Yoav did, he wanted for her to appear in front of David HaMelech, but she should look like she's in mourning. Oh, another source for mourning. And he tells her, he's Ablina, pretend you're in mourning. How? How do you do that? Externally. The Livshina big day able. We're bigadam of Avelus. It doesn't say we're rent garments. So what's the bigadam of an oval? Bigadam that are not clean. Pashut, soiled garments. That's the source that an oval, since you cannot launder your clothing, the garments are soiled. And don't anoint yourself with oil. And you should pretend as if you are already many days into it, etc., etc. By the way, that's the source. And an oval is also the tich boishes.
Wait, why don't we think that's rending your garments?
It doesn't mean that, because like I told you, rending the garments is not connected really to Avelus. It's done prior to Avelus.
Right.
It means soiled garments. Menuden Mitzrayim Mahim B'Tich Boishes Tashim Tashima. It says in a brayso. Menuden Mitzrayim Asurim L'Saper U'Lachabes Clear Amachaya Shmamino. 3 lines from the bottom. Another din. Avel Chayev B'Kriya. It used to be during the time of the passing. Nowadays, for various reasons, Kriya is done during burial, or it's important because many times we are learning still in Chutz La'aretz. Mashiach is not here. But many people who live in Chutz La'aretz leave an instruction, or the family decides for them to have the merit to be buried in the Holy Land. So if the Avelim are not traveling to the burial, which happens sometimes, then when you make the Levaya and you depart from the mace who's being transported, that's where you rip Kriya. So how do you know that you're chayiv in Kriya? So since the we started today's share with us that after the passing of Nadav and Avihu, so God told Bnei Aaron, right, after the passing of Nadav and Avihu, God told the was in a summer that your garments, because they were doing the service in the holy temple, so made all negative. Since they were told not to rent their garments, second to last line is araya that normally you have to rent your garments. What about a menuda? Menuda ma'avikriya. Teku. Mitzoida ma'avikriya. Tashima says, ubegadav yu perumim. The garment should be perumim. What does the word perumim mean? So when it says Rosh Yiyah Parua, we just learned today, Machloikas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. But this line, no Machloikas. Everyone holds perumim means mikuraim, torn garments. Indeed, Shma Mina. Next, Avel Chayev B'Kfiyas Amita. Just like Atifa Saroish, it's very difficult to understand, but like we mentioned the words that since no one wears this Atifa Saroish, it will be mocked by it. So it's not practiced nowadays. Kfiyas Amita, the main reason why we stopped at a certain time overturning the beds is because the Goyim went through a period and there a terrible anti-Semitism where they were accusing us of practicing sorcery. One of the reasons why we have our black hats is because sometimes during the Middle Ages, they wanted to shame sorcerers, witches, and Jews. And that's the pointy hat of the witches you have today. That is our hat. It came from there. They made us wear funny hats. And they used to burn the sorcerers. And it was a sakana. We ran with it. He says, you're giving us a hat? We made it into a streimel. We made it beautiful, which is a good way, a good attitude. But anyways, there was a fear that they'll accuse us of sorcery if they're going to see us overturning the beds. So we stopped overturning the beds aside of practical reasons that our beds are not exactly like their beds. But it used to be that an avel was obligated to turn over beds. I want you to know it's a good example of in avelus. Every time we say teku, so what do when you have a doubt? There's a general rule: if it's midaraisa, you're machmer. If it's the rabbanon, you're lenient. Even those who hold that by avelus, there's a doiraisa, we're always lenient. We're lenient in avelus. And you find an expression that certain things changed, we have less laws of mourning. You're not going to find that in any other part of Allah. We're very lenient within the framework of halacha, where, God forbid, we cannot decide which rule we should not practice, but that's an interesting anomaly, exception. That kfiyah samita, din, and chazal, we don't practice anymore. But let's go back to the ikra din. How do you know that? The 20 bar kapara, let's get moving. Listen to this logic. God Almighty says that I created men in the likeness of my image, as we understand in Hasidus, that even though God is Ein Sof, which makes him completely above any form and shape, but when God chose to create, he created the Seder Ishtalshalus, and the Ein Sof in the world of Atzilus becomes, the oil is infinite, the lights are infinite, but the Kalim are 10, and they are arrayed in a partsuf. There's a right, and there's a left, and there's a center, there's a top and a bottom and a middle. This is part of the world of Atzilus. That is the meaning of Nasa Adam Bitsalmenu Kidmusenu. Of course, Atzilus is, God forbid, b'chlal, not something physical at all. But the concept of there being the 10, again, arrayed on 3 columns, that is the so there's a certain similarity between the physical form of man and the godliness of the world of Atzilus. And what happens when a person passes away and they are buried? So that form becomes transformed back to earth, at least by most people. And death originated from the sin. Because of sin, God himself would not have wanted for the human being's form ever to stop being the way it is, because it's similar to godliness. Godliness is infinite, so should we be. Elama, we are overturned, so therefore, kafu mitoiseyem olem. So there's some overturning that we also must do after there is a passing. And why dafka the beds, amongst the many approaches, is because where is man formed? There are 3 partners, so God is God. But the other 2 partners, the father and the mother, the baby is formed on a bed, so the bed is overturned. And just to point out that even though, like we mentioned, nowadays we don't do hafichas amita, one of the reasons al pi nigla for the covering of the mirrors by a novel is because in the mirror you celebrate the human form. And covering of the mirror is a certain secondary expression of, if God, since there is a haficha of the form, so don't look at your own form, aside of the other reasons, al pi Kabbalah. Menuda mitzoremayim kfiyas amita. Take it. Next, Ava also masiyas malacha. An Ava cannot do malach. Now, this is not lamites malachis. Malacha here means working for profit, transacting businesses. The poil mamish of a person is a mourner today. It's common practice that they write right away a shtar, in which if they own a business, it's not only they may not work, their business may not work. But if they write over their business for others, then the business can run. When my father was sitting Shiva for his mother, for my grandmother, Allah Shalom, I remember with his humor, he wrote a document, he wrote over his business to his children, but he wrote big letters only for the Shiva. Afterwards, it's back his. But that is what allowed him to have his factory running. Let's go right. So, there are work restrictions. As it says, that there'll be a time that our Chag will be turned into mourning. So here we have a hekish between Chag and Eivel. And as we spoke on yesterday's daf, that they are the opposites. In other words, Avelus and Chag are one opposite the other. That's called Aficha. One, and you can understand one from the other. One is the opposite of the other. But here, we're not going in the opposite. Here we're darshaning a correlation. Af avel aser b'malacha. This is a very broad hekesh. I want people to understand that because it's not the lama tes malachas. An avel can open up the light. It's a whole different type of malacha, but this is some sort of correlation. Weiter. Menuda mao basiyas malacha. So we just quoted the Braisa. Amar Rabbi Yosef Tashema. This is going back to the public fast days. The people that were machman on themselves after the 13 fast days, they only didn't work a day. And it says, so again, my love, it means that just like a menuda and an oval may not work. So the Gemara says, no, lav dafka asha aram. Let's go back to Tashemam, another attempted proof. Again, this we had on Amud Aleph, that even when a person, God forbid, is in a ban, shoyne v'shoyne loy, niskar v'niskar loy, clearly shmamina, he's allowed to work. Aval is more serious, heavier. Mitzoida mao basiyas malacha tekum. Next in, aval asr berechitza, and aval may not bathe. Nowadays, as we had in brachas, the concept of an istanis, people then used to bathe once a week. So then they mamish, and the whole avelus, the shiva, the isur rechitza doesn't go into the shloishim. Only during aninus and primarily during avelus. Nowadays that people bathe or shower every day, we're going to learn more about this in the Gemara. Even then, no way is one allowed to have a pleasurable bath or shower. But if a person, it's not that you have to go into cold water, but if you make the water lukewarm, and you go in and out just to clean yourself, today people are more lenient. But Me'ikar Adin, an oval is not allowed to bathe. How do we know that? Because it says, we had this above, when Yoav, right, when he enlisted, he attempted to make that peace between Avshalom and David. And this woman, this Isha Chachama, was told not only about her not wearing, like we said, soiled clothing, he also told her, Va'al tosoichi shemen, don't anoint yourself with oil. And anointing is part of bathing. Ask all the Frenchies. They don't bathe, but they put French perfume. So I guess you get to smell their bat smell and their perfume together. But they consider that, they call that, I think, a French bath. Azar minik. Okay, right. Menuda. Mao, but I apologize, but I couldn't hold it in. Menuda, but what about a menuda? Can a menuda take a bath? Rabbi Yosef Tashema, again, al tainus. That kishaomru, when we say that by during a tainus sibur, you're not allowed to take a bath. That's only Elohim and kol gufa. You can't only bathe your whole body at one time. But just your face, hands, and feet, mutter. And again, my love, they're all alike. No, ashara. You know, there are other dinim for tainus sibur, that a tainus sibur cannot wear shoes, for example. Maybe for that and for the other dinim. Metzoida mal berechitza teku. Next din, avel. Asur b'neilas, a sandal and avel may not wear leather shoes. Since God, in that prophecy in which Yecheskel was foretold that his beloved wife will pass away, God tells him, yes, you should wear shoes. So from that mechlal, the kule alma asur. Okay, good. Menuda, ma'benilas sandal. So Amar Rabbi Yosef Tashema says in a brayso that kisha amru, that during a tainus sibur, asur b'neinas sandal. Remember, we learned this in tainus. Lo yamru ela be'ir. That's only if you're in the city, so you don't need to wear shoes. But if you are going on a trip, they didn't have sneakers then. Going on a trip, if they would wear just their sock or whatever shmata they would put around their feet, right, the pebbles, the stones, they would hurt themselves. Then they were allowed to wear leather shoes. Okay, Saad, when you go out for a trip, noyel, but when you go into a city, you remove your shoes. Here again, and then it says, so does that not mean that we compare them with all of their halachas? Now that we established that an oval, right, may not wear leather shoes, so neither may a menuda. No, the Gemara says, loy, asha'ara. Okay, no proof. Mitzoida, ma'binil sasandel, teku. Next in, avel is asur b'tash mishamit. How do we know this from? The chsev, this daf is very important. So what did we have? Let's go back. We have dinim that we learn from what God told Bnei Aharon, Aaron and Bnei Aharon, Parsha Shmini. We have what Yoav told this woman. We have a lot from what God told Yechezkel what he should not do as a mourner, and also what he should do, the doim. And now we're going to go to one final source of mourning, and that is that when David had the first child that was conceived by Bathsheba from David HaMelech passed away. And there are details over there. Actually, there it says in Nach that when David HaMelech, who was already behaving like a mourner in prayer for this infant baby not to pass away, the moment he heard that the child passed away, immediately he got up and he anointed himself and he changed his clothing. And that's just to be aware of the challenges with all that. Because if a person, God forbid, loses a child, they are a bona fide avel with all of the dinim. And just because he found out the child passed away, what, he was right away allowed to anoint himself? We just said anointing is bathing? Absolutely not under normal circumstances. So there are some details of David HaMelech where we say that since he was a king and Melech b'yafiyoi has to appear to the people, so some of the laws were not there. There's another fascinating discussion here, Moed Katan Tezvav, that David HaMelech, the child was sick for a long time. And therefore maybe since he already practiced all of the 7 days plus of mourning prior to the passing, he didn't have to keep it after the passing. Here's the concept. No, you have to keep 7 days of mourning. In this case, he already kept it. But let's shelve this for a moment. It says like this, that at some point, David went to console his 7th wife, Bathsheba. By the way, that was the 7th wife. And by Yova, and part of his nechama was he had a relation with her. So from here we extrapolate Machlal that while they were mourning, Meikara Asur. That's the source. Menuda ma b'tashma shamita, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Tashema, Kol oisem shanim shahoy Yisrael b'midbar. After the sin of the spies, for the remaining of the years, we were like Menudin. Azoy steht in Abraisa. 1 second, during those times, did we not have a normal married life? Yes, we did. Yet, during the times, that's called again Menuda la Shamayim, Vishim Shumitoiseyim. Says Anaya that a person is a Menuda is allowed to have marital relations. Amalei Abaya. Now the words are the opposite of what we learned above. V'dilma Menuda la Shamayim Shani Dekil. Maybe, that, being in the desert was like a nidui from God. Maybe there we're more lenient. So the Gemara says the last 2 times you wanted to bring a raya from a menuda la shamayim, the last 2 times was about when there's no rain. We emphasize, that's chamur. The Gemara, the kill? No, didn't you say twice already chamur? So the Gemara clarifies what we mean is it's different. We don't know whether it's more serious, whether it's more lenient. Sapukim esapkale. So zilachi or kamatchale. If you want to bring a raya from Tashma Shamita, that we were allowed to have marital relations in the desert. So Abaya says, I can argue maybe it's called more lenient. Nizil Hacha, when we learned above the question of Atifa Saroish, for example. So maybe a Komatchale. Yeah, the Talmidei Chachamim sit with Atifa Saroish after the 13 fast days. Maybe that's more Chamer. It's just you can't compare a case to case. What about Mitzvah? Mitzvah Ma B'Tashma Shamita. And we already had this in Moed Katan. So Tashema, the Tanya, remember that whole thing. What does a person want less? To be away from his wife, to be away from the community. Tanya, that during the count of the 7 days, he should be outside his tent, which means then he should be like a menuda and like a novel and for us, Shamit. And what does outside the tent clearly means? As it says, after the Sinai experience. So Shmamina, that a Mitzvah during that time is also B'tashma Shamita. Actually, only during that time. As we learned above, hold on, why did you remain with the question whether a menuda is Asr and Tashma Shamita? True that we were unable to resolve it from the 40 years in the desert, but why don't we use this Braisa that seemingly is saying that a menuda is also Asr and Tashma Shamita? So Lachamo, the same thing we had before. It doesn't say explicitly in this Braisa that a menuda is Asr in Tashma Shamita. All it says is that this mitzvah during the times that he's cleaning the 7 days, when he begins the process of purification, he's like a menuda, he's like an avel, but maybe it's only regarding other halachas, like he can't take a haircut. and others. And there's another din that during the times the Mitzayra is Asr B'Tashma Shamita. And again, like it says the Asr B'Tashma Shamita. This Braisa doesn't shed any light regarding Menuda. Next din. Now, interesting, Chevra. Not everyone has to be in the temple when a carbon is brought on their behalf. It's better to be there. If you're a man and you're not going to be there, you're going to miss the mitzvah of smicha, but you don't have to be there. What about an avel? The avel einoi mishaleach carbon oisef. Even if you're not going there, you may not send a carbon to the holy temple. How do we know that? The Tanya Rab Shimon Omer, when it says in the beginning of Vayikra, it says im zevach shlomim karbonai. So pshat, we're speaking about a carbon shlomim. The drush shlomim goes to the person. That when the person is shalom, then you bring a carbon. This man that the person is shalom, then you can bring a carbon. But when a person, this man shuhu oinain, person who's an oinain, and here it means an oinain and an oval, that person is not shalom. He may not send the carbon. Menuda ma'oshi shalach carbon oisov, Amar Rabbi Yosef. Let's go learn. Tashema, kol oisim shanim, that the Yidden were in the midbar, even after it was decreed upon them to remain there. Menudam hoyu, they were considered like those who are banned from heaven, yet the shachol carbon oisayim, in person also. So here again, Amalei Abayim, then no, Menuda Lashamayim maybe is more lenient. Maybe a person who was banned by a beis din is more chamur. And again, the Gemara says, Kiel, didn't you say chamur? Again, Sapukim Isapkele, Umatkele. No, we're just saying they're not the same. Okay. So what's the din by a Menuda? We don't have a proof. We don't know. Remains unresolved. Many things are unresolved here, if you notice. Mitzoida ma'oshi shalach karbonos. Talmud Tashema, it says, this is not a pasuk in Chumash, this is a pasuk in Yecheskel. There, the Navi there is speaking about a kohen who became tamei, and it says va'achar toharosoi, achar toharosoi. Taiches, the Gemara is referring to someone who was tamei from corpse tuma and needed to undergo the 7 days with the sprinkling on the 3rd and the 7th. It means achar prishosam and ames. Now again, we're quoting the verse in Yecheskel, Shivas Yomim Yisprulai, 7 days should be counted for him. That's referring to the 7 days of counting of a Mitzvah. Then the pasuk says, that on the day that he enters the holy, Yakriv Chatasik. Now, what does that pasuk refer to? Machloikis. One opinion is Rabbi Yehuda Daf Tezayin. This last Hemshech HaPasuk is not speaking about the kohen who was tamei, who now became pure. That's another din, the din of Minchas Chinuch. That the first time a kohen is actually doing his avodah, he brings an inaugural flour offering in the amount of 1/10 of an ephah. But Rab Shimon says, no, the pasuk is speaking about a kohen who's tamei, who now is entering now he became tar. And it means, Ubavoy, Yaakov, the pasuk is telling you that only now that the kohen is pure, now may a carbon be brought for him. This man should oil be even if you're not in the temple, but for you to send a carbon, you must have the potential, the halachic right to enter the temple. When you are allowed to enter because you are pure, then a carbon may be brought on your behalf. This doesn't go to a non-Jew, by the way. A non-Jew rabbinically may not enter the temple, but a non-Jew can only go until the chayil, but he can send certain karbanos, but not for a yid. So even though the pasuk is speaking about a kohen, but that's the source that we are learning that if anyone is tamei, you may not send your carbon, and therefore that answers that a mitzvah may not send this carbon. Atkan, at least we concluded all of these dinim of avelus, and again, menuda, mitzvah. There's a whole chart that you have to make. What is resolved, what's not resolved, with the whole question, how do you deal with tekus? One thing is for sure that by avelus, any question, machlokes halachically, we will always rule leniently. Just to conclude that when I was sitting Shiva for my father of blessed memory, so two Lubavitch and Rabbanim told me that the Rebbe said that when we are lenient in the laws of mourning, lenient, God forbid, doesn't mean not to keep within the framework of halacha. But as Hasidim, normally we are told, to go beyond the letter of the law, or to choose the more, we give virtue in being stringent. Not so by Avelus, that the more lenient within halacha, of course, that we are in Avelus, the better it is for the neshama, and the easier the neshama will have an aliyah. Interesting concept, unique to Avelus, God willing. We're going to now that we
Rabbi, do you know, can I ask you a question about an onan?
Yes.
Today, as opposed to during temple times when we were talking about Aaron at the time that occurred on Passover, and what would it be today for an onan? Well, about the sacrifice, he ate the meat. I believe he was required to eat.
Okay, so let me say it like this. I'm speaking now Ashkenazim, okay? But Baruch for Ashkenazim, including Chabad, we follow the ruling of the Ramah, the restrictions of not consuming wine, not eating meat is only during the Aninus period, which is from the passing until the burial. Parenthetically, they didn't have the Xanax then. So if a person needed to drink wine, he would be allowed. But the drinking of wine for pleasure was prohibited. We allow a mourner who's in Shiva, yes, to drink wine and yes, to eat meat.
Contrary
Comfort?
to Aaron.
Oh, is that for comfort or?
No, well, there are certain restrictions that are the greatest height during Aninus, that are eased during Avelus. And by the way, there are certain other rules that, interestingly, we are more lenient by Aninus and more machmer by Avelus. And let's see, but I want to answer your question, that we allow a Avel to drink wine and to eat meat, but we don't allow it during the period prior to the burial known as Aninus. To be continued, Chavra. Good day to everyone.